Good morning and welcome. This is another teaching on the book of Daniel. Today we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 11, which is the long section that's describing the history, really kind of going from like the 6th century, but all the way down to the 2nd century BC. So it's going to cover a long period of time. And this I've typically found is not a area of history that a lot of Christians are very familiar with, because it's not the history that's recorded like in the accounts of like 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. People tend to be really familiar with that level of history, but first 2nd Kings ends with the exile, and 1st, 2nd Chronicles also ends with the exile, and this is kind of like picking up after the exile and moving on for several hundred years. So I think it's really interesting to see, and a lot of the details, I think, helpfully for us, are corroborated by ancient historians. We have a lot of ancient historians, some Jewish historians, some Roman historians that tell us a lot about this particular time period. But we also have to kind of like keep in mind that it's not just history for the sake of telling us history. This is something that the angel in Daniel chapter 10 is explaining to Daniel. Daniel had this dream and this vision that was really uncomfortable for him, and he needed the kind of the healing and the insight from the angel in order to kind of help us, the readers, to understand what the narrator is trying to tell us. And remember that Daniel chapter 11 is not a standalone chapter. It's part of this larger section of chapter 10 all the way through chapter 12. So we'll get to the end of chapter 11, and it's going to kind of give you the impression it's not the end of the story, because it continues on into chapter 12. So there's a sense to where there's a misleading chapter break at the end of chapter 11. But they kind of need something, because it's like 45 verses long, and it's just too long. So that's kind of where we are today, looking at this, and we'll do the best we can with the imagery that we have in the text. But I think if you're able to follow along with a good study Bible, you're going to be able to make sense of what's actually taking place here. I don't think that this is, I don't think it was intended to be difficult to understand, we'll put it that way. So let's start looking at our presentation. Okay, so I thought I would give the title to Daniel chapter 11 as the Kings of the North and the South. And you will start to realize that the plurality of that noun, kings, is very important, because this is not a king of the North and a king of the South. These are multiple kings of the North and multiple kings of the South. And that's going to be important for you to understand as we move through the passage. So what in the world are we looking at in this particular chapter? Well, this is going to detail the history of the 6th all the way down through the 2nd centuries BCE. And of course, this is the history of the nations that are surrounding Israel. So of course, it's Jewish history. This is the history of the various nations that were on the borders of the nation of Israel. Okay, so Daniel 11 is going to detail the history from the Median, Persian, and the Greek empires. And as we're going to see very quickly here, that most of this is dealing with the history of the Greek Empire. And it's going to conclude or end with the events in the year 164 BC. And the specificity of that dating will become very, very clear at the end of this. Now, the narrator, who is obviously writing this and explaining this to us, is going to use some subtle imagery that is actually pretty easily understood if you have a basic knowledge of history, okay? And several ancient historians actually recorded these events, and casual readers of the Bible can follow the narrative of Daniel 11 by cross-referencing the persons in the events with several sources, okay? So this is not the kind of like the deep, heavily layered imagery, kind of like that we see in maybe in the book of Revelation, to where it's a lot more difficult to kind of discern. This is actually pretty easy to see. I mean, it talks about persons doing certain things, and you look back in history, and there's only like one person that it could be referring to. So there's not a lot of debate in regard to the meaning of these things. So, but luckily we can cross-reference this with many ancient historical writers. So, of course, as we've seen throughout our teachings of the book of Daniel, we can see that the earliest interpreters, the earliest Jewish interpreters, were the writers of First and Second Maccabees. We have a Greek historian named Polybius, another Greek historian, Diodorus Siculus. Livy is a Latin historian, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, we have Josephus, who gives us a 20-volume history of the Jewish people called Antiquities. So we have an abundance. We have a treasure trove of helpful sources and voices to help us clarify what actually is here in Daniel. Okay. Now, this is a really important point. If you have never read through this and you're trying to make sense of what's going on, the narrative of Daniel chapter 11 follows two thrones that are geographically related to Israel. So we're going to constantly see about an individual called the King of the North. And by the North, it means the area that is north of Israel, which is the Greek-controlled region of Syria. And then you're also going to read about the King of the South, which is in the nation that is south of Israel, which is Egypt, which is actually controlled by Greek rulers at that time. Okay, so they're both controlled by Greeks, so it's still part of the Greek Empire, but you're going to see that various persons are going to occupy this throne of the King of the North throughout history, and various persons are going to occupy this throne of the King of the South. Okay, so the North and the South, that's not like North America, South America, it's North and South that is in the way that's geographically related to where Israel is. And so you can pull up a map of like the 2nd century BC on Google, and you can see that in the north you're going to have the region of Syria, and you're going to have in the south the region of Egypt, but they are controlled by the Greek Empire at that time. It's a divided Greek Empire, but it's still Greek, and we'll talk about why that is the case. Okay, so you're going to see throughout the passage, you're going to see the King of the North did this, the King of the North did this. And you're going to see like, well, that person came to his end, and then the King of the North did that. This is not the same individual. It's different individuals throughout history that are occupying that throne as the King of the North, and the same thing for the King of the South. It's not a single individual that's the King of the South, because you're going to see various people are going to occupy that throne. They're going to die, and someone's going to take their place. Okay, so that's a really, really key point for understanding this. And again, as you read through it, it's going to become pretty clear that that is what is taking place. Okay, so what we'll do is I thought instead of just like reading the entire passage at the beginning and then going back and commenting on it, I thought let's just read smaller sections and let's kind of comment on what's actually taking place. Okay, so start in the first 2 verses. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then a 4th will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. Okay, so what's going on here in the opening 2 verses? Well, remember that the unnamed angelic revealer from Daniel chapter 10 is going to remain the speaker for all of chapter 11 and actually for most of chapter 12. So you have to, of course, set this into context as to what has been set up already in chapter 10. Now, the function of the opening 2 verses is really to quickly move through history. You know, we kind of start off in the first year of Darius the Mede. So we have the Median kingdom, and then you can see it quickly moves through the Persian Empire, and it ultimately ends with the Persians coming into conflict with the realm of Greece. Okay, so that's at that point we've actually moved from the 6th century to the 5th century down to the 4th century. We've moved like 200 years over the course of 2 verses. Okay, you can see that's just the narrator is kind of saying, okay, Daniel, from the perspective of where you are, how can we move our readers through history in a rather quick pace? And so that's what's taking place there. Okay, now before we get to Greece, we have a little mention here of 4 kings that are mentioned in regard to the Persian era. Okay, now over the course of the Persian era, there were more than 4 kings, but here it's just going to describe 4. And it seems to be the four that actually were the most historically relevant. In fact, the book of Ezra in chapter 4, verses 5 through 7 will actually mention four kings. And I think, to the best of my knowledge, there are only four Persian kings that are actually mentioned explicitly by name in the Hebrew Bible. So that would make sense that would be what is mentioned here. So it doesn't mean there are only four. You can look in history. There are quite a few more, and many of them reign for quite a long time. But if you're going to get from the Persian Empire, which is, again, in the late 6th century, all the way down to the Greek Empire, which is in the middle of the 4th century, you have to get through 200 years there, and you're going to need more than four kings. So, but of course, as you can see with the purpose of the passage, it doesn't dwell on these four kings. It just kind of gives them one verse, and it moves along until we get to a conflict with Greece. Okay, now something that I've tried to do in a lot of our passages is to show the amount of attention that the chapter is giving to each particular empire. Okay, so Daniel chapter 11 has 45 verses. Okay, how many verses are given to the Median Empire? 1. Chapter 11, verse 1. How many verses are given to the Persian Empire? 1. Chapter 11, verse 2. How many are given to Greece? 43 out of the 45. Okay, so while I'm telling you that we are moving through history, as you can see here, it's not an equal treatment of history. It's almost like we're going to start with Media, and then we're going to go to Persia so we can quickly get to Greece, and we're going to give 95% of our attention to the Greek Empire. And even within this heavy emphasis on the Greek Empire, we're going to see that most of the emphasis, and when we get there, I'll show you, like 55% of the emphasis is actually on one particular king. Okay, so it's important for us to kind of see that it's not an equal treatment of history, and even when we get to the Greek Empire, it's not an equal treatment of the kings. Okay, it's like we're moving people from the time of Daniel quickly to the Greek Empire, and then quickly through a variety of kings to focus on one particular king. And you, as the reader, need to ask yourself, why is the author focusing on one empire and quickly getting to one particular king? Why is he doing that? So it's make sure that we are respecting the emphasis that the author is trying to place here. And so I've tried to do this. I think we did it. I did a graph with Daniel chapter 2, and we saw that most of the emphasis was on the fourth Greek Empire. We also did it in Daniel chapter 8, where most of the emphasis was on the Greek Empire. We also did in chapter 9, where most of the emphasis is on the Greek Empire. And here in chapter 11, we see the same thing. It's very clear that when these chapters are describing, the four empires and the four kingdoms, it's not an equal treatment. They all are trying to put the majority of their emphasis on the fourth and final one, which happens to be the Greek one. Okay, I've tried to show that throughout there. Hopefully you're persuaded by this particular point. Okay. All right, let's move through verses 3 through 4. Okay, we are going to pick up the pace rather quickly because trust me, we're not going to do 2 verses per slide, or we will be here until the return of Jesus. All right. So, having moved us to the Greek Empire, we have a mighty king will arise, and he will rule with great authority and will do as he pleases. Okay, I'm just going to kind of stop right there. Whenever you read in the Bible that a king is going to do as he pleases, that's never a good sign. That always means that the king is going to be prideful and arrogant, and he's going to be humbled by the God of heaven. Okay, but as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants, nor according to his authority which he wielded. For his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to others besides them. Okay, so here we have what seems to be a Greek king who's going to have a lot of authority. He's going to do what he pleases, but eventually he's going to die, and his kingdom is going to be broken up into 4, but not to his own descendants. Typically kingdoms would be passed on to certain descendants of the king. Okay, that's just how it works. Okay, it's pretty easy to see who this person is. This is clearly Alexander the Great. Okay, who was the most famous Greek king of all time. And a lot of historians will actually say that the influence of Alexander the Great makes him one of the 10 most influential persons in all of history. because of what he did. Alexander the Great was basically able to conquer kind of the known world at that point, but he conquered them by making his conquered persons take upon Greek language and Greek culture. Okay, so they all were speaking the same language, and they were all integrated into the same culture, and that is called the process of Hellenization, the learning of Greek language and Greek culture. Okay, so he's spreading the Greek Empire not just with military might, but also with Greek ideology and language. Okay, Alexander the Great unfortunately died at a young age. He died in 323 BC. And he didn't have any active children at that time. What we actually have learned from history is that he had an unknown child by a woman who had not actually given birth to that child at the time that Alexander died. So clearly he didn't have any descendants to pass on his reign to. And since he didn't have any children at the time of his death, his kingdom was broken up among his 4 Greek generals. The term for these Greek generals is that they're called the Diadochi, which basically is a Greek word meaning the successors. Okay, these are the 4 people that succeeded him. And it makes sense. If you have the king who dies, who is the most powerful person? Well, it's the person who is in charge of the king's army. So we have 4 generals there. They basically say, okay, let's just kind of divide everything up. Okay, and you can kind of see where these 4 generals divided their kingdom. So I'm going to we'll talk about these 4, but in the end, we're only going to focus on 2 of them. So Greece and Macedonia went to General Cassander. Thrace went to Lysimachus. Northern Syria and Babylonia went to Antigonus, who was very quickly replaced by Seleucus I, and that's going to be a really important person that you want to kind of consider. So this is the northern area in regard to the location of Israel. Northern Syria and Babylonia went to Antigonus, but very quickly is going to be replaced by Seleucus I. And then, interesting enough, Egypt and Israel and the southern part of Syria went to Ptolemy I, and he was called Ptolemy I Soter. Soter is the noun for savior. This is a king that described himself as a savior figure. Okay, so the New Testament, lots of different people are described as savior figures, but it was you can see that it was a term for a military leader, at least at this point, 400 years before Jesus was born. Okay, so at this part of history, Israel is a part of the southern Greek Empire that is closely related to Egypt. Okay, that's something you want to kind of keep in mind. Okay, so the purpose of our study, we're going to be interested basically in these final 2 groups. The king of the north, which is kind of basically Syria, Babylonia, and the king of the south, which is effectively Egypt. Okay. All right, let's move along in our passage. Okay, so, and again, something to kind of keep in mind is that even though Alexander the Great Greek king died, all of his generals are Greek. And so the dividing of his kingdom still maintains itself as a Greek empire. This is not moving to different empires. It's not now a Syrian non-Greek empire. It's not an Egyptian non-Greek empire. The Egyptian country is effectively a Greek country at this point, and the same thing with Syria. Okay, all right, so let's read through our passage. Then the king of the south will grow strong along with one of his princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His dominion will be a great dominion indeed. After some years, they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. But she will not retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up along with those who brought her in and the one who sired her, as well as he who supported her in those times. One of the descendants of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and display great strength. Also their gods, with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, he will take into captivity to Egypt. And he, on his part, will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. Then the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south and return to his own land. His sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he may again wage war up to his very fortress. Okay. So again, I mean, you can see like they're not even going to give the names of the kings. Just going to be like whoever is ruling in the north is the king of the north, and whoever's ruling in the south is the king of the south. And look, it's just a long history of these people that are fighting. And guess who is unfortunately caught in the crosshairs of all this? It's always Israel. It's always the Jews. It's always the people of God. Okay. So, but you know, there's some details here that we can actually pin down through history. Okay. So who is the king of the south? We know that this is Ptolemy I. We know exactly when he reigned. He reigned from 323 through 285 BC. Okay, so as much as we can be certain about the dating, I'm going to kind of put that in here so you can kind of help us to see how we're moving through history at this particular point. And if you're, by the way, if you're reigning as a king for that long, that's a long time. That's nearly 40 years. I mean, we have presidents that reign in America for like 4 years or 8 years, and even like reigning is a stretch of the word at some point. But for some people to reign for nearly 40 years, that is a long time. It's a really, really long time. Okay. So here we got the king of the south. We know who that person is. We know that he is Ptolemy I. Okay. And we learned that one of his princes will gain ascendancy over him. Well, who is that person? Well, we know that person is Seleucus I. And remember, Seleucus I is eventually the person who did take over northern Syria. Okay, so we kind of have like one of the princes of this southern kingdom eventually go and take over the northern kingdom. Okay, so we know who those persons are. And so what you'll see throughout this is that we're going to have a variety of persons that are named Ptolemy. And it'll be Ptolemy the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And you have a variety of persons that are named Seleucus the first, second, third, and fourth. We'll also have a variety of persons named Antiochus, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so unfortunately in history, they all don't describe themselves as the first, second, third, fourth. We as historians have to like kind of figure that out. They're all described with the same name, so we have to date them and figure out who they are and make sure that we distinguish them. Okay, so we learn about this alliance that takes place. It says that after some years they will form an alliance. We know that this will happen. This happens in 250 BC. And it's an alliance involving the marrying of daughters. Okay, so we know who the daughter is. We know her name is Berenice, and she is the daughter of Ptolemy II. And she actually married Antiochus II, who was Seleucus I's grandson. Okay, so we have Seleucus. He has a son, and his son, or ultimately grandson, is Antiochus II. Okay, so what sort of alliance is going on here, where you have the marrying of a daughter of one kingdom through these, the grandson of another kingdom? This is meant to be a peace alliance. Okay, this is something that happened in ancient history. Okay, okay, but when you and so keep in mind here, Ptolemy is always going to be a king of the south. Okay, and the Antiochus figure is always going to be a king of the north. Okay, so Ptolemy is always in regard to the south. Antiochus is always in regard to the north. Okay, so they have this peaceful arrangement here, but as you can see in the text, that she will not retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up. Okay, so unfortunately, Berenice and Antiochus II, the two newlyweds, are murdered, resulting in her brother, her brother being Ptolemy III, coming to rule from 246 through 221 BC. Okay, so again, we can date those things pretty clearly, and there's no one else that would fit into that. All right, so so we have all this conflict, and the point is we've got these kings here, but they're not getting along. That's the key thing, is that we're telling history involving the nation that is really, really powerful north of Israel and the nation that's really powerful south of Israel, and they're not getting along, which means that unfortunately Israel is caught in the crosshairs. Now, Ptolemy III, he fought successfully against Seleucus II. Okay, remember, Ptolemy is the king of the south, Seleucus is the king of the north. And in doing so, Ptolemy was able to plunder the gods of Syria. That's what is meant here, where it says that their gods with the metal images and the precious vessels and the silver and the gold, he, namely the king of the south, will take into captivity to Egypt, because Egypt is that's his kingdom. Okay. We can see there that Seleucus II will have a counterattack, but he's going to be unsuccessful. Okay. It says the latter, latter, meaning the king of the north, will enter into the realm of the king of the south, but he will return to his own land. He will try to counterattack, but clearly he's unsuccessful. Okay, now his sons of Seleucus II, being Seleucus III and Antiochus, who kind of reign successive to one another, they actually are going to amass their armies and they're going to secure Samaria and Galilee. Okay, so you can see at the very end of our passage, it says his sons will mobilize and they will assemble a multitude of great forces. Okay, so we actually know who those people are, when they reigned, and where they actually gained their armies from. Okay, so again, moving through history, by the time you get there to Antiochus III, we're now in the 187s part right there. Okay, so we're now in the 2nd century. Okay, so you see, moving along pretty quickly, but we can pinpoint a lot of these details. All right. Hopefully you're still with me here, but I imagine for a lot of people, this is just probably going to be like information overload. There's just too much stuff here. But it's got a recording, and if you have a good study notes in your Bible, you're able to follow along. Okay, let's keep reading. The king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given into the hand of the former. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. For the king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than the former, and after an interval of some years, he will press on with a great army and much equipment. Now, in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south, the violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege ramp, and capture a well-fortified city. And the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops. For there will be no strength to make a stand, but he who comes against him will do as he pleases. That's not a good thing. And no one will be able to withstand him, and he will stay for a time in the beautiful land. By the way, that's a reference to Israel, with destruction in his hand. Okay. Remember here, it's the angel telling this vision to Daniel. So whenever the angel says, the violent ones among your people, okay, that's the angel telling that to Daniel. So who are the people of Daniel? That's the Jewish people, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind there. All right, so king of the south here, this is actually now Ptolemy IV, and we can see that he actually won this really important battle called the Battle of Raphia, and we know the exact date in which this was won. It was on June 22nd in 217 BC. However, this did not dissuade Antiochus III, who's the king of the north, who led other successful fights in Persia and Asia Minor. Okay, so you can see that that's the language of the first couple of verses. So the king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than the former. So that's he goes and does so in Persia and in Asia Minor. Okay, so that's a very famous battle in the Syrian history. Now, the Battle of Raphia ended with a peace treaty between both kings, as we can see here. Where's the language there of the peace treaty? Let's see. I don't think it's specifically mentioned there, but that is something that actually happened as kind of a result of this particular battle. But the interesting thing about the peace treaty is that the two kings agreed that they would not fight one another as long as the other king lived. Okay, so that peace treaty was struck in 217. Now, when Ptolemy IV died in 203, so what is that, like 14 years later, Antiochus III didn't think that the treaty really could be enforced anymore. It's like, well, how is it that I have to maintain the peace with this southern kingdom if that king no longer lives? So that's when he actually picks up and he starts fighting. That's why it says in the passage that after some time that this will go and take place. Okay. Now, we also see there where the angel had kind of told Daniel that some of your people will lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. And he describes them as the violent ones among your people. So we know exactly who these people are. They're actually Jews that are pro-Egypt at the time, and they actually rebel against the new king that's coming to power. But unfortunately, they are actually put down. So they have a violent uprising. It's so interesting that I've taught this before to some people, and it's difficult for them to kind of understand what it's like for there to be a violent uprising. But with kind of like the events that are going on in our world today in 2023, people, I think, are able to kind of better understand a lot of what this would have looked like. Okay. Now, the rebellion allowed Antiochus III, remember he's the king of the north, to capture Caesarea Philippi, okay, and Sidon, okay, which actually was guarded by these paid mercenaries, these Aetolian mercenaries, and we know the year of that was in the year 199, okay. So that's where it says there that the king of the north will come. He's going to cast up a siege ramp and capture a well-fortified cities, and the force of the south will not stand their ground, even if they have their choicest troops. Okay, so again, we know where that city is, we know when the year was, and we know who those choice troops actually were. Okay, so again, something to kind of keep in mind there is that we have the phrase "the beautiful land" that's there. That's a description for Israel. Okay. So that's not the north. That's not the south. The beautiful land is always a way to describe Israel. Okay. All right. So at the end of this passage, though, we have this, we have the conquest of Antiochus III, who actually is able to take control of Israel. Okay. Right there, it says that he who comes after him, this now Antiochus III, will do as he pleases. No one's able to withstand him. He's going to stay for a time in the beautiful land with destruction on his hand. Okay, so at this point, the king of the north is going to wrest the control of Israel away from the king of the south. So prior to this point, remember, Israel was in control of the king of the south with Egypt. Okay, hopefully you're still following along. We're still kind of in the 2nd century at this particular point. All right, verse 17. He will set his face to come with the power of his whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it, but she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. Then he will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many, but a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. Moreover, he will repay him for his scorn, so he will turn his face towards the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall and be found no more. Then in his place, one will arise who will send an oppressor through the jewel of the kingdom. Yet within a few days, he will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle. In his place, a despicable person will arise on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. The overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant, namely the prince of the covenant, will also be shattered. Okay, so we have, it looks like 3 figures here that are being described in verses 17 through 22. 3 major figures. Okay, so fearing the involvement of Rome, Antiochus III actually married off his daughter, who is, this is, by the way, this is Cleopatra the First. This is not the famous Cleopatra that's involved with Caesar towards the turn of the centuries. This is like the first Cleopatra. This is the lesser known Cleopatra. Okay, so we actually know who that is. So again, we have the king of the north marrying off his daughter to the king of the south, and the hope here was that by marrying off the king of the north's daughter to the king of the south, that the king of the north would actually be able to pacify him. But unfortunately, Cleopatra betrayed her own father, and she actually ended up siding with Egypt. And so that's what it says there, that she will not take a stand for him. She will not take a stand for her father or be on his side. Okay, so again, we know exactly what was happening there in history. So, Antiochus, unable to kind of pacify the king of the south, he turns towards the coastlands of Asia Minor. But Rome at this particular time is actually strong enough as a nation to kind of like not actually conquer people, but it's strong enough to kind of play referee. Because during this time period, it's really important to note that Rome did not want any particular kingdom to get too powerful. And so whenever it looked like one particular kingdom might be getting the upper hand, Rome was strong enough to kind of like to intervene and to kind of like stop that kingdom from getting too powerful, because Rome itself, of course, had ambitions on conquering all of these lands. Okay. But Rome, of course, has, Rome is like way over in the West. And so if they're going to come over, they're going to come over with boats and ships, which is why this is taking place on the coastlands of Asia Minor. So think of like the areas of like Ephesus and Pergamum, that sort of stuff. Okay. So Antiochus, he turns his attention over to the coastlands, but Rome is actually able to defeat him in the year 191. And the interesting thing is that Rome is strong enough to force Antiochus to pay tribute to Rome. Okay. And so how does he get his money in order to pay the tribute to Rome? He goes to Elimes in order to plunder the temple of Bel, also known as the temple of Baal. And this upset a lot of people, understandably, and he eventually gets murdered. Okay. I mean, you go into someone's temple and you go into the treasury and you take all of their money so that you can pay another nation, is of course going to anger all those people. It's going to upset the sensibilities of their religion, and their Antiochus III, through his arrogance, actually ends up being killed. Okay. So you're going to see a lot of these people are trying to like plunder. They're going to plunder temples because they know that temples are places where the local people are going to store all their money. Jews are no different. So his son is Seleucus IV, okay? And he reigned from 187 through 175. So, the king of the north still owed money to Rome, so Seleucus still had to kind of pay that bill, okay? So he tried to pay off Rome by sending his chief financial officer to Jerusalem in order to raid that temple for money. Okay. So remember, Jerusalem is part of Israel, which is in control of the king of the north. Okay. So we know who this person is. It's a very famous person named Heliodorus. Okay. I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about this particular person. Okay. So we've got this guy that's he's a unclean Greek Gentile that's just going to like walk into the temple, into the treasury, and try to take a bunch of money so that the king of the north can pay off Rome. Okay. Are Jews going to like this? Answer: no, they're not going to like this. Okay. And we actually have an interesting account of this in the book of Second Maccabees, where it seems that Heliodorus is actually halted or thwarted. But the way that it's described here in the passage, it says that one will arise, this I think is Seleucus IV, who will send an oppressor, that's sending Heliodorus, through the jewel of his temple. That's the jewel of his kingdom, excuse me. That of course is a reference to Israel. Yet within a few days, he's going to be shattered, but not in anger or in battle. Okay, so this person that sent Heliodorus is going to be shattered, but not through conflict and not through anger. So something's going to happen to him like this. There's nothing else that's kind of said about it here, but we get a fuller description in the historical account of Second Maccabees. Okay. Now, we're going to start reading. Actually, I already started to read in verse 21, where it says, in his place, a despicable person will arise on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred. So that starts in verse 21. So what you need to know from this passage is that from verse 21 all the way to the very, very end of the chapter, in verse 45, is going to describe one single king, and that at least one single king of the north, and that's Antiochus IV. Okay. And what do we learn about Antiochus IV? Well, we know that it says he's the person on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred. Okay. Because really there are like two others that were supposed to go before him after the Seleucus was murdered. And the interesting thing there is I think I skipped this. Heliodorus actually conspired to have his own king murdered in order that he could steal the throne. Okay. But Seleucus had another child, another guy named Antiochus, but he was just too young. And then Heliodorus just kind of seemed like, when you murder a king so that you can take his place, people typically don't like the murderer. And so Antiochus IV actually is kind of like the person who ascends to the throne, but he gets Heliodorus dealt with, and the younger son of Seleucus is just too young, and so something happens to him as well. So his ascension was really kind of marred with this sort of like this, it was suspect and people didn't like it, but, and of course, that cast a lot of darkness, I think, on the legacy of his reign. And the author of Daniel 11 tells us that. Okay. But again, the key thing you need to know is that as Daniel chapter 11 started by talking about the Median kingdom with one sentence and the Persian kingdom with one sentence or one verse, and then the rest of it dealing with Greece. The entire history of Greece is mostly going to focus on one particular king. Okay. So verses 21 through 45, that's like 55, 56% of the entire passage. Okay. So again, you as the reader, you're asking yourself, why is the author so focused on one particular nation? And in the midst of that nation, he's focused on one particular king. Why is he doing that? Why is that important? Well, we've already seen this emphasis in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8 and in Daniel chapter 9. And again, we're seeing it much more clearly here with quite a few more details here in Daniel chapter 11. Okay. So it says that the overflowing forces will be flooded away before him. This is before Antiochus IV, and shattered, and also the Prince of the Covenant. Okay. Prince is just another title that's actually given at that time to the high priest. Okay. A prince is just another ruler. And again, I've talked about this when we were going through Daniel chapter 9. We know exactly who the Prince of the Covenant that was killed during the time of Antiochus IV. And we know that was Onias III, and that he was murdered in the year 171. Now, we need to understand the circumstances around this. Okay. So Onias III, he was a conservative purist Jew. Okay. He was not in favor of the Jewish people Hellenizing and taking on Greek language and Greek culture and Greek religion. So he didn't want to do that. Okay. So of course, he's, if they're kind of considered to be like a vassal kingdom of this northern kingdom, this northern Greek Syrian kingdom, he's not going to last very long. But what happened is that he was replaced by his brother Jason, because Jason basically told Antiochus, like, hey, I will ally myself with you if you give me the position of the high priest. And at that time, since Israel didn't have control of their land and they didn't have a king, the highest authority in Israelite religion would have been the high priest. Okay. So you've got you're going to have conservative Jews that are saying, oh, this guy who has now taken the place of the high priest is an illegitimate, corrupt person. Okay. But if you're a Jew that says, no, we should be, going along to get along, and we should get along with the times, and we should just kind of become Hellenized and give up our Jewish distinctives, you're going to like someone named Jason, because he's an ally with Antiochus IV. Okay. What is this right here? This is a fresco that was painted by Raphael. You probably know Raphael, one of these famous Renaissance painters like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. So this is actually in the Vatican, and it was painted over the course of 2 years between 1511 and 1512. And what it is, it's the expulsion of Heliodorus. Remember that person that was sent in by Antiochus III into the Jerusalem temple, into the treasury, in order to take their money so they can repay Rome? It was a really famous part of history, and of course it's described in Second Maccabees. But Raphael spent 2 years painting this. As you can kind of see on the right, you can see Heliodorus just kind of like on the ground, and he's being cast out by all these people, and you can see the Jewish people throughout the temple, and you can see what looks like on the left. You see the guy that's kind of like there, kind of like being held up by people. That's probably the high priest at that particular time. But that's what this is. It's a very famous painting. It's still there today. You can go to the Vatican, you can see it, and it's just kind of up there on the wall. And again, this is like zoomed out really, really, really far. And this was painted over the course of 2 years to describe this particular event of Heliodorus being cast out of the temple and not being able to loot it for money. Okay. So again, these are not just obscure little pieces of history. I mean, these are things that were kind of enshrined in some really important ways. So I wanted to kind of point that out to people. It's very, very beautiful. So you can learn more about it. Just go to Google, type in like Raphael, Heliodorus, Vatican, and this will come up, and there's a lot of information on it. Okay, verses 23 through 28. Okay. I know we're kind of running a little bit on the long side, but just want to make sure that we get through all of our content here. Okay. All right. After an alliance is made with him, he will go and practice deception, and he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. In a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest parts of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them, and he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. He will stir up the strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army, so the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war. But he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down slain. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table, but it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. Then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, and he will take action and then return to his own land. So we can see here that there's an alliance that's made with him, that is with the king of the north. This is Antiochus IV. And we know who this king is with whom he made an alliance. This is King Eumenes II, who's the king of Pergamum. Okay, so now he's making an alliance, a military alliance. Okay. And we also get this description here that we can corroborate with history, that Antiochus IV was known for his lavish spending. It says that he was going to distribute plunder, booty, and his possessions among them. And we actually know from one historian that Antiochus actually paid his entire army a year's salary all in advance. And that was just something that you either need to have a lot of money to do, or you weren't really, really good with your funds. Unfortunately, whenever he did that, he found out that he actually needed some more money. So you can see that there's a large battle that actually takes place here, where it says that he's going to stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army. Okay, this is a very famous war. It's called the Sixth Syrian War, and it happened between 170 and 168. At this time, the king of the south is Ptolemy the Sixth. Okay, so we've moved through quite a few Ptolemies at that point. Okay, now, although in history Ptolemy had the larger army, which is one of the reasons why Antiochus had to ally with Pergamum, he was actually betrayed by two of his own court aristocrats. Okay, we know who these people are. They were the two guys named Komnenos and Cinyras. Okay, and you can see there in the text of Daniel, it says that he, the king of the south, will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow. Okay, so again, we know who those choice people are. They are the aristocrats, like kind of in his own court. Now, so that happened, I think, in the year 168. So the year earlier, in the year 169, the two kings, this is Antiochus IV and Ptolemy VI, they met in Memphis for a peaceful agreement. Okay. But it's pretty clear that, they met for peace, but really they were just kind of like feigning friendship on both sides. And the text of Daniel basically says that, like, look, they met for peace, but they were just speaking lies to each other. They were at the same table, but they didn't succeed. So, returning home from Memphis. Okay. Remember, Memphis is down there in the south. Okay. So he has to stop in Jerusalem. And what does he do? Okay. Well, he needs money because he's spent all his money on his armies. And what he does here is that he plunders the temple treasury in Jerusalem. So it says there in Daniel that he's going to return to his own land with much plunder. Okay. And his heart is set against the Holy Covenant, and he's going to take action and return to his own land. Okay. So there's a plundering that takes place here at this particular time. All right. Here's where things get interesting, if they haven't already gotten interesting. At the appointed time, he, Antiochus IV, the king of the north, will return and come into the south. But this last time, it will not turn out the way it did before, for ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore, he will be disheartened and will return to become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and will do away with the regular sacrifice. And they will set up the abomination of desolation. Ooh. By smooth words, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly towards the covenant, but the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. Now, when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. Okay. So we actually get a good little description here of some of the bad things that are taking place in Jerusalem, and we get some of the responses of some of the Jewish people. Okay. So it begins in verse 29 by saying that at the appointed time. So you're kind of set like, okay, there's something here that's going on. There's a climactic part of Antiochus's life. Okay. So here he attempts to invade Alexandria, Egypt in the year 168, but he was actually discouraged when he found that the Roman ships are there on the coast and they're actually aiding Egypt. So the ships of Kittim is just kind of a cipher name for the Romans, at least in this particular passage. Okay. And so again, you're seeing that Rome is saying, okay, we don't want Antiochus. We don't want this king of the north to get too strong. So they're going to go and they're going to ally themselves with Egypt to kind of make sure the balance of power is not getting too crazy. Okay. So of course, this particular battle did not turn out as it did before, as Daniel said. So Antiochus is angry. He is furious. He is irate. And he had to retreat. He had to go back north. So if you're going from the south to north, what do? You have to stop on your way in Jerusalem. And what's going on here in Jerusalem is that there's some other interesting things that are going on. So remember that Jason, the brother of Antiochus III, had allied himself with Antiochus in order to become the high priest. Okay. But there was this other guy named Menelaus who basically said, hey, Antiochus, I will give you more money if you make me the high priest. And Antiochus was like, sure, that's okay. So you got Jason, who was formerly made the high priest. Now he's ousted because this other guy named Menelaus had offered more money. And so they are under the impression, it's kind of difficult to get the details really clear here, but it seems like that Jason and Menelaus were under the impression that while Antiochus IV was down there in Alexandria fighting, they thought that Antiochus was killed. So they thought, okay, now we can have this fight against each other to see who's actually going to be the high priest. Okay, so Antiochus doesn't like people revolting in his own realm, so he wants to show up, and he's going to have to quell this particular problem. So of course Antiochus is upset because he's been forced to retreat. He's now being ganged up on by not just Egypt, but also by Rome. And now he hears that his own people are revolting. So what does he do? In the summer of 167, Antiochus sent troops to attack several Jews, those that are revolting, of course. He sent them to halt all the sacrifices in the temple and to set up an altar to Zeus Olympus on the sacrificial altar. Okay, it's very, very important that when it says in Daniel that they will set up the abomination of desolation, the abomination of desolation there is this altar to Zeus. It's a thing. It's an abominable object, this terrible, desolating sacrilege that is set up in the Jerusalem temple. And it's this despicable, unholy affront to the Jewish monotheist, at least those that are still keen on observing their Jewish distinctive ways. Okay. But it's important in Daniel, the abomination of desolation is not a person. The abomination of desolation is a thing that is set up in the temple. It's very important. Okay. So notice forces from Antiochus set up the abomination of desolation. Okay. So it's the Antiochus is not the abomination of desolation. The abomination of desolation is a thing that is set up by his forces. And it's done, of course, to kind of to deal with the Jews in this uprising. Now, in the midst of this uprising, we now have three different types of Jews. Like Jews basically said, okay, how do we respond when our way of faith and life is being threatened? Okay, we have basically group one, those who compromise their Jewish faith with Hellenism. They're just saying, okay, we need to accept Greek rule, we need to accept Greek ways and Greek language. Let's give up our circumcision. Let's give up eating kosher foods. And so these are the compromisers. The second group are those who refuse accommodation, but they don't actually resort to violence. They just say, we're going to remain faithful, we're going to be loyal, but we're not going to revolt violently against Syria. And then you have the third group, which is basically those who refuse to accommodate, but they are going to resort to violence, and those are the Maccabees. So what we have in our passage here is that it describes those who have insight among the people will give understanding to many. Okay, and this seems to be the second group. These are the people that they have the insight enough to not accommodate. Okay, and they're sharing that this is the way of God, that God wants us to do. God wants us to trust in him and to wait that he is going to be the person that's going to vindicate us if we're faithful, if we're loyal, if we're obedient. And unfortunately, they suffer as martyrs. You know, they're killed with the sword by flame, they're put into captivity, and they're plundered. Okay, and then we see at the end is that, well, they're going to be granted a little help, and this seems to be a reference to the Maccabean people. You know, the Maccabean armies, like, okay, yeah, they have a little bit of help, but they're actually joining in hypocrisy. Okay, so the author of Daniel does not agree with refusing to accommodate but revolting in war. The author of Daniel wants you to refuse to accommodate without resulting in violence. Okay, so it's interesting kind of how that dynamic is actually working there. Okay, again, just quickly going through. All right, some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time. It's really a time of the end, but that's okay, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Then the king will do as he pleases. That's never a good sign. Okay, remember this is Antiochus. And he will exalt and magnify himself above every god and speak monstrous things against the God of gods. That's Yahweh. And he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. You know, like his days are numbered. All right. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god. He will magnify himself above them all. But instead, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. He will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help of a foreign god. He will give great honor to those who acknowledge him and will cause them to rule over the many and will parcel out land for a price. Okay, so everything that's being described of him at this point should make you think, I don't like this guy. This is not a good guy. This is not, you know, the God of heaven is not going to allow this guy to get away with what he's doing. Okay, we actually, again, we're starting to see this language here, those who have insight, those who have insight. And so it appears 2 times in Daniel chapter 11, but it's also going to appear 2 times in Daniel chapter 12. And I think the author of Daniel wants you, the reader, to be one of those people who have insight. Okay, so that's something that I want to alert you to the fact that it becomes kind of a technical phrase describing a certain Jewish response to conflict by a pagan nation and the threat of the Jewish way of life. Okay, it's one Jewish response among at least 3 that we know of. And so it's going to show up in chapter 11. It's also going to show up in chapter 12, and I'll bring that up again whenever we go through chapter 12. Okay. We can see, obviously, the arrogance of Antiochus. We see that he's going to exalt and magnify himself. He's going to speak monstrous things against the God of gods. So Antiochus, as far as we know, he is the very first king to have coins minted with his image with the title God and God made manifest. That's why Antiochus is called Antiochus Epiphanes, because Epiphanes is the title meaning God made manifest. So he actually thought of himself as God made manifest, and he put that on the coins for the circulation of currency within his realm. So as far as we know, he's the first person in history to do that. And I got an example of one of those coins that we'll look at here. We see a lot of descriptions here in regard to his kind of like his lack of interest in like certain gods, but he favors other gods over them, and how he treats a certain temple. And so, we can see that we know from that Antiochus habitually plundered pagan temples in order to, put money into his own pockets. We know that he favored Zeus over Apollo, and you need to know that Apollo was the actual ancestral god of the Seleucids. So this is Antiochus choosing one new god over the god of his ancestors. He rejected Tammuz, who seems to be the god that a lot of females were interested in. That's the reference there where it says that he will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or for the desire of women. That's what that means, that he's not going to show regard for the god who is the desire of women. It's not that he doesn't show an interest in women, in the desire of women. It's regard for the god that women desire. And so we actually know who that, or what that particular god is. We see that he's going to honor a god of fortresses. He actually renamed the Jerusalem temple the Temple of Zeus Olympus, because remember, his forces set up the image of Zeus in the Jerusalem temple. Okay. Again, conservative Jews would think that this is extremely disrespectful, understandably so. And we can see that Antiochus favored those Jews who gave up their Judaism in order to side with him. And when it says that he parceled out land for a price, he was actually willing to give some of the conquered land to those people that were willing to compromise. He was actually willing to give it to these Jewish compromisers. Okay, so again, all these details of all these bad things about him. I want to look at one of these particular coins that we actually have. And if you can read Greek, you could take the image and you got to turn it around and kind of see it in all capital Greek letters. We have the phrase Vasileos Antiochou Theou Epiphanos Nikiphori, which in English means King Antiochus, God made manifest, bearer of victory. You can actually see the word Nike bearer there. Nike, where we get the word for victory or conquering. And so this is, again, it seems that Antiochus is the very first person to put these titles actually on coins for him. Okay. So, the Jews are saying like, this is not the kind of guy that is a God honoring king. This is a megalomaniac tyrant that is way too arrogant and way too prideful. And the thing is, if you're a reader of Daniel, you already know what God does to these sort of kings. You already know what God did to Nebuchadnezzar. You already know what God did to all the other kings. When they get too prideful, God knocks them down. Okay, so what's going to happen to this guy? Well, we all can anticipate what's going to happen to him. Okay. All right. These are the last 6 verses. We're almost done. Last 6 verses. All right. All right, we're at the end. Okay. At the time of the end, the king of the south will collide with him. That's the king of the north. And the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He will enter other countries, overflow them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall. And these will be rescued out of his hand. Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. And he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape, but he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. And Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels. But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him. He will go forth, and great wrath will destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. That's Mount Zion. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. Okay, so that's the end of the chapter. Okay. I have to admit to you something about this last little part of it. This is a difficult passage. It's a difficult passage. Why is this a difficult passage? It's a difficult passage because we cannot verify anything that's said in these final 6 verses with what we know from history. And that makes it difficult. Okay, to where everything up to this point, from 11:1 through 39, we know all the names, we know all the persons, we know all the dates, we know all the locations, we know all that stuff right here. This part we don't. We don't know what it is. And so it's acknowledged as difficult, and all the commentators have to wrestle with that. Okay. So there are three ways that interpreters have attempted to resolve these particular difficulties. And I'm just going to lay them out for you here, and you can kind of decide what you want to do with this, because I don't think there's a really easy way to resolve this particular difficulty. Option number one, or option A, cut the passage up. Let's cut this passage up. So let's just say that Daniel 11, 1 through 39 refers to the historical events of the 6th through the 2nd centuries. And let's take these final 6 verses, verses 40 to 55, and let's make them refer to the events prior to the second coming. So that between verse 39 and 40, you have this big cut of what, like 2,200 years without any indication. That's how some people have interpreted it. Okay, you can decide for yourself if you think that's an appropriate way to use scripture. Option B, assume that the text is historically correct and regard all of our ancient historians and witnesses as mistaken. Okay, because the reality is this passage here says that Antiochus basically set up between the seas and Jerusalem, and he died there. Like he came to his end, no one actually helped him. But our historians tell us that he died of a sickness, and he died actually in Babylon. Okay, and so option B is to assume that the text is correct and that all of our historians are wrong. Okay, there have been some interpreters that have done that. Option C is to accept the text as it stands without trying to harmonize it with anything else. Just say that's what's there, and we want to interpret the text as it stands. Okay. Neither of these options are easy, and they aren't without their difficulties, which is why I'm saying there's a difficult passage. And I want to show you that, hey, interpreters over the years have come up with different ways to try to deal with this particular problem. Okay. But the point is, he comes to his end. Okay. For the readers, that's good news. It's, you know, this terrible person that is harassing the covenant, harassing the temple, and setting up this abomination of desolation, he's going to come to his end. Okay, last 2 slides. How did the initial readers understand Daniel chapter 11? There's this really interesting passage in 1 Maccabees that I think really kind of helps us to see how people were responding during this particular time period. Okay, so you got a guy named Mattathias, who is one of the people that starts the Maccabean revolt. Okay, he's a Jew that doesn't want to compromise, but he wants to respond to violence. So the king's officer spoke to Mattathias as follows, quote, "You are a leader, honored and great in this town, and supported by sons and brothers. Now be the first to come and do what the king commands, as all the Gentiles and the people of Judah and those that are left in Jerusalem have done. Then you and your sons will be numbered among the friends of the king, the friends of Antiochus, and you and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many gifts." Remember how I told you that Antiochus was willing to pay people out, those who were willing to support him? So here, look, it's like, hey, just honor the king, honor Antiochus, do what all the other Gentiles and all the other compromisers are doing, and you're going to be honored with silver and gold and many gifts. So that's 1 Maccabees 2, 17 through 18. You want to know what he did? What did he do in the very next verse? But Mattathias answered and said in a loud voice, "Even if all the nations that live under the rule of the king obey him and have chosen to obey the commandments, every one of them abandoning the religion of their ancestors, I and my sons and my brothers will continue to live by the covenant of our ancestors. Far be it from us to desert the law and the ordinances. We will not obey the king's words by turning aside from our religion to the right hand or to the left." When he had finished speaking these words, a Jew came forward in the sight of all to offer sacrifice on the altar in Modin, according to the king's command. When Mattathias saw this, he burned with zeal, and his heart was stirred. He gave vent to righteous anger. He ran and he killed him on the altar. At the same time, he killed the king's officer, who was forcing them to sacrifice, and he tore down the altar. Thus he burned with zeal for the law, just as Phinehas did against Zimri, son of Salu. So you're seeing here that he says, we're not going to compromise. We're not going to be worshiping in this corrupt temple. And he says, if anyone is going to do it, we're going to kill them. And that's what he did. He picked up a sword, and the writer, you can see that the writer of 1 Maccabees is writing it, trying to portray these people as the heroes. But what it does, though, is it actually says that he was burning with zeal for the law, just as Phineas did. And Phineas is a famous figure from the book of Numbers. I think it's in Numbers chapter 25, where Phineas had this righteous zeal for God, and he killed somebody who was bringing unholiness into the sacred space. And the sense is that Phineas is actually regarded in the book of Numbers as someone who did what God wanted him to do. And so they're kind of portraying the Maccabees in this light here. So how did they understand what was going on here? Well, they responded against the threat of the destruction of Judaism in light of all this Hellenistic religion and the compromise of monotheism by picking up swords and saying, we're going to fight them all and we're going to get rid of them. And eventually they did actually win their war, and they won their own independence. So that's how the first readers of Daniel 11 actually responded to that. Okay. Now, how should we respond to Daniel chapter 11? How should we respond when our religion comes under attack? I got 3 applications here. Number 1, in the midst of the megalomaniac tyrant, the people of God who had insight displayed the courage to remain faithful when compromising their Judaism was a readily available option exercised by many. While the temptation to accommodate our Christian truths and ethics in order to live more comfortably is ever present, we too must exhibit the courage to remain faithful, and we must encourage others who are wavering. There's always going to be a temptation to give up our truths in order that we can get along with other people, so that we won't be persecuted, so that we won't lose our jobs, so that we won't be attacked, or that we won't be slandered. But we have this example of these faithful Jews in our text that encourage us to remain faithful. And so we too need to be faithful and to be obedient and to be loyal to God. And we want that courage to be contagious to others. We want to encourage others who are also wavering. So the key thing here is to be faithful and not to compromise, which seems to be, one of the common applications in apocalyptic literature. That was the major application in the book of Revelation. And as you're seeing, it's a major application in the book of Daniel. Number 2, Daniel chapter 11 implicitly offers a warning to other arrogant leaders who might arise in history. While unjust, corrupt, and godless rulers will continue to come and go, the everlasting God of heaven is on his throne in heaven, and he will not let the guilty go unpunished. Okay. So obviously other corrupt and bad and wicked leaders have arisen in history and are going to continue to arise in history. But we have to remember that God is in control. God's in charge. God is sitting on his throne. God's ruling, and he's not going to let the guilty go unpunished. So we can trust in God, and we can recognize that a day of judgment is coming, and the wicked are going to get what's coming to them. And so we don't have to worry. We don't have to try to take things into our own hands. We can trust in God and who he is and his insight. And number 3, in the midst of a detailed retelling of history, Daniel 11 emphasizes those who have insight as the faithful who did not resort to violence or shows of force to achieve their goals. And we must not ignore the godly heroes in retellings of history that are often dominated by acts of the violent. Too often in history, we tend to focus, or at least our culture wants us to only focus on the bad people, the people that did terrible things. And often their deeds are kind of demonized. Like, look at how terrible these people are. And thereby we need to feel guilt today, 400, 500 years later. And the people that actually did the right thing, they actually did the courageous thing. They stood up and they were obedient to God, and they were heroes. We tend to not think of them, or at least the retellings of history want us to forget about these godly heroes. And I think in the midst of this history here, we've got this history from Media to Persia to Greece, and it's got all the kings of the north and all the kings of the south. But still in the midst of the history, the narrator wants you to look at these faithful Jews, the ones that didn't accommodate. They didn't take upon Greek language, Greek worship, Greek culture. They were going to be faithful. They were going to be loyal, and they were willing to die as martyrs in order to maintain their faithfulness. And so as we we're reading through this story, let's not get bogged down in all the details of, when this king of the north was living and when this king of the south was fighting the king of the north and when the Romans were let's not get bogged down in all those details and forget the fact that the text is even emphasizing that there are faithful Jewish people that stood up in the midst of all this, and they're honored in the text. And they're honored in a way that's meant for you, the reader, to say, oh, this is the example that I'm supposed to follow as well. Let's look to these godly heroes, the people that were resilient, they were loyal, they were obedient, and they suffered for that. I mean, Jesus Christ is the best example, the person who was faithful, loyal, and obedient to God, and he suffered as a martyr on the cross as our example that we're supposed to follow. So let's remember their examples as we look through history, and not give in to only looking at the violent persons to the point to where we forget about the examples of the faithful. Okay, so we've been going on for a long time. I'm going to stop the recording here. I have no idea how long we've been going, but I'm sure it's probably over an hour. So hopefully this has been enlightening to you and you got a little bit better understanding of what's going on in Daniel chapter 11. Obviously, it's packed with a lot of detail and history. You can get in contact with us by checking out the description or the information in the description below the video. And we'd love to have you for fellowship. So thanks for watching. Take care and be blessed.